everybody. Thanks for coming today. Thank you so much, Kate and ISCG. The acronym stands for
Interior Systems Contract Group.
Okay, thanks for this space. We really appreciate it. And I'm with the AMA Detroit chapter. I represent the MRSIG group, which means the Market Research Shared Interest Group. It's just a special group within the AMA Detroit chapter that focuses in on market research activities. So we've been doing these special MRSIGs since 2013, and various topics are talked about back when. But the AMA Detroit chapter is really a great group. If you're interested in joining or seeing what else is happening in terms of future events, just go to amadetroit.org. I think there's a networking event coming up at the end of May. So anyway, I'd like to introduce Jason Mantell, who's with Escalent. He's the managing director of automotive and mobility. They're based in Livonia, and they're a global company, a top 20 company. So he's here today. We really appreciate it. We've been in touch the last couple of months, and I really appreciate it, Jason. He's our speaker for the MRSIG. There's also people online. This is going to be recorded and available to folks online as well as in person. So anyway, Jason's going to talk about the future of market research. So take it over, Jason.
No, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. So thanks for having me. There's a handful of people in the room today, and I haven't stood up like this in 2.5 years, still doing qualitative and getting back in person in market research. But it's been a while since I've been able to get a chance to go out and speak. So thank you for having me. For those folks here, those folks who are online, and Dave for staying in touch all these years and inviting me. I appreciate it. So this topic has been more and more prevalent the last couple of years. This is about not necessarily just the future in general, but for years in market research, we've all come through the changes, right? The phone to mail and mail to online and online to having to fit everything on a small screen with surveys, interact with people virtually, right? We've gone through all of those methodological changes. But there's been another change going on behind the scenes, and that is the technology and the new products and services that are being offered are changing as well. And it's getting harder and harder to ask about those. Our clients are coming to us saying, what is the future going to look like? How do we position products and services in the future? You read things like GM, Stellantis, Ford, all of them. We're going to go from 5 billion to 30 billion in whatever it is we're offering, connected services, database services in the next 10 years. And behind the scenes, all of those organizations are going, right, how the heck are we going to do this? Lots of ideas, lots of inputs, but what the customer is eventually going to buy into is a bit tricky to figure out what eventually they're going to be willing to pay for and adopt and find usage in. So over the last couple of years, I felt this evolving, this way to be able to talk to consumers about a future they're uncertain about because they struggle to relate to it or put it into a context in their daily life, and get some rich research that, in my case, as a supplier to many of the auto manufacturers, that the clients can actually use. Dave gave a quick introduction to Escalent, but I will shamelessly take 30 seconds to tell you about the organization. If you're not familiar with the name Escalent, the company formed about 4 years ago out of a merger of Pace and Market Strategies. And since then, we've also brought Grail Insights into the mix, and Mercator Advisory and Javelin Advisory. There were 5 companies that came together to create Escalent. We're about 800 employees. A lot of us here in Detroit that work in automotive, but a lot of our other offices are located where those clients are at. Financial services out of Cambridge. We've got a tech group out there in the hub in Northern California on the West Coast. We also have offices in Shanghai and the UK, and a very large group of folks out of Noida, India that provide operations and a lot of secondary research, and a great group of insights folks there. A lot of what you're going to hear me say today is going to sound automotive. I'm a car guy, I've been a car guy for 30 years, but there's multiple practices going on inside of Escalent. And as much as we collaborate together for sharing ideas on methodology, our worlds are overlapping too. We all know there's tech companies trying to build cars, and we have an energy practice, and that energy practice has to do with electric vehicles are coming on and how our charging stations and infrastructure are going to support those. Life sciences and health may not seem like a connection, but there's cars out there that want to be able to tell if you're going to blow a 0.10 when you get in the car or whether or not your blood pressure. We're actually not just sharing methodologies, we're actually sharing a lot of research now, and even clients who have similar overlapping interests. So a very large organization with a lot of industry group reach and a lot of opportunities to share. The ideas I'm going to talk to you about today are in auto, but we're leveraging them across the organization. This was a quick hit. I just wanted to share the breadth of the logos we work with. This is not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea without rattling off a bunch of numbers and how many different organizations we're working with and the different industry groups that we service. So for years in market research and automotive, we kind of had a frame of reference we knew in which to do our work. I was testing products and what they look like and design and the features that would go into a vehicle. You could get together with consumers and say, do you like the big wheels or the small wheels? How comfortable is the seat? Which features do you want? Do you want these 10 or these 20? And how do you want it packaged and how much are you willing to pay? But even the customers we were talking to had a common frame of reference. They could relate to what we were talking about. It's a vehicle and things go into the vehicle and it was relatively straightforward. But now this new mix of technologies is blurring the lines. So let me give you a great example. The one that's been really hot topic the last couple of months is this idea of software unlocked services. And every one of my clients is calling it something different. For years, you buy a car and the features would be on the vehicle and you'd buy the car with what you wanted on it and you'd take it home. And maybe things got packaged together and you'd have to pick a package, but generally when you drove away, that's what you got. Well, now, beginning with Tesla and many other manufacturers, you drive it off the lot, and there are things on that vehicle that you may not know are there that can be unlocked. You could, through a subscription or through an app, turn something on that you didn't have before that will make the vehicle go faster, or turn on some sort of cameras or do something different. It becomes something on the vehicle that's unlockable, or something that's downloadable that doesn't exist today. More and more we hear of, you can download this app with this feature into the vehicle and it's something that you can get after the fact. So what you're now having is not will a consumer buy it up front, but will they buy it later? And when they buy it later, will they just want it once or will they want it multiple times? And do they pay for it every time? Or do they pay for it just once and hang on to it for a while and voluntarily shut it off? And then how does it get upgraded? And what everything from what can they use to how they're going to use it to how it costs is up for grabs. And you recognize as a market researcher the complexity of a survey mechanism that's going to address all of those different possibilities. It's a lot harder than it used to be. And our clients are learning alongside of us with us. We come across what we call the who-what conundrum in this. For a long time, our clients would come to us and the manufacturers would say, here's a solution. Can you help us figure out who's going to buy it? We got a great idea. Who's going to buy it? How much they're willing to pay? How much do you think they'll use it? Or vice versa. They come to you and go, we have a target customer. We've done target customer research. We know what we're going after. We've got some ideas, but we're not quite sure what we're going to buy. But what happens when you don't know the who or the what? You just got a bunch of cool things on the shelf and you're not sure who's going to buy it or what they're going to buy. You've got to find a starting point. You have to anchor yourself in a what to get at the who, or anchor yourself in the who to get at the what. And I'll have a few examples to show you how we get around that, how we get to that. Autonomous driving is another one of the hot topics. And I mentioned briefly connected services and then alternative powertrains. How do you ask people about something that they can't relate to? Autonomous driving is quickly coming along. Right behind electric vehicles are going to be cars that drive themselves. But how do you ask someone about whether or not they'd be comfortable in an autonomous vehicle when most of them have never experienced something above level 1 or level 2 autonomy? Maybe they've got some super cruise, but even then their hands are still pretty close to the wheel. Imagine a world so far out at some point where you're asking questions about something such as your vehicle's generating data. For any number of reasons, your driving behavior, or maybe cameras that come off the vehicle as you go down the street, what's happening around you. If I asked you as a survey respondent, as a consumer, would you be willing to share that data? Would you share it with the grid or share it with the infrastructure or share it with other drivers? Maybe it's for safety reasons, or it's just for the benefit. Maybe if I let you share it, I could time stoplights so they turn as you drive along. And what I've asked you is going to generate more questions than answers. Okay, that's great, but are the lawyers going to get a hold of what I share? Is the government going to get a hold of what I share? What's the manufacturer going to do with it? What's the monetary value? By giving you something that has value that I should retain access to myself. And now you're down a hole of many more questions. And while this is going through their head, they're struggling to answer the question that's in front of them. So I'm going to give you today 3 concepts, 3 techniques that we're using for trying to get at what the future answers are for consumers today that don't quite know what that future is going to look like. First, what I'm going to talk about is taking an indirect path, finding a way to ask them something that not necessarily a direct question. Electric vehicle, I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's one of my favorites because in the last couple of years, we're getting more marketing and more information, and people are learning faster. But just a couple of years ago, J.D. Power had said 2/3 of people don't even know what an electric vehicle is. They know it's a car, they know it's got a big battery in it, and beyond that, everything else is a mystery. Maybe they can talk about range or charging and they get lost. How do you survey a population of 2/3 of them don't even know what you're talking about? Yes, you might be able to educate them a little bit, but there's a limit to what you can do in 2 or 3 sentences before you ask them the question. So we're going to talk about taking the indirect path. The second one is educate and retain. The ability to bring your respondents along and maybe over time, teach them a little bit more and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and hang on to them until they come along for the ride with you and they start to know a little bit more. One of my, I'll call it a pet peeve, and I hope one of my clients isn't listening. One of my pet peeves in the survey research for years has been we want to go out and survey a population. Don't talk to anybody who took a survey in the last 6 months. Well, why? Now, if it's a brand study and you're talking about brand awareness, I get it. But these folks who are comfortable at taking surveys know what's expected of them and have had some experiences with some others. Many have learned a few things that make them even smarter about trying to put into a frame of reference what you're talking about. And the third one is building out the future, building out what tomorrow looks like in a way that you can start to frame these ideas you're coming up with and you bring the consumer along with you into that future. Okay, just making sure I don't run out of water. So let me start first with taking this indirect path. We're looking for a way to bring out of the consumer or the respondent something that relates to what they have already today. Maybe it's a behavior they have today, or an activity they do today, or another product that has something similar today that they can relate to. So we're going to dance around it without necessarily asking them directly. Now, being indirect in your questioning, one of the hard parts to this is survey real estate is already a premium. We've been debating for years that you can't give somebody a 45-minute survey, and people want to do it anyway, and we battle it. But then when it comes down to it, if there's money to be made and answers that need to be done, we do it anyhow, right? So when I tell you that you can't get an answer with one question, are you interested in an electric vehicle? And I tell you it's going to take 20 or 30 questions to get there. I just ate up all of your survey real estate trying to get at the answer you want. But I promise you it's the right thing to do because it's going to get you a more accurate result because you're getting at, you're almost determining whether or not they're going to purchase or adopt, rather than just asking them outright when they really don't know the answer to that. And you've also got to be careful of whether or not what you're asking them is, we know life stage agnostic, right? We're asking about their behaviors or their attitudes, but you've got to be careful that if you're saying, hey, are you willing to adopt this thing in the future? Is it the type of thing that they're going to adopt now, but at some point soon they're going to have kids, change life stage, and then it's all out the window. So there's always a self-consciousness of when you're asking about their behaviors today or their attitudes, are those attitudes or behaviors they're going to stick with them? In many cases, attitudes to some extent will, right? We all talk about the early adopters. If you're open to technology, you probably will still be open to technology in the future. That's not something that goes away, but you're conscious of whether or not you're bringing them onto something or asking them questions that may change over time and that would change the responses to them. Let me give you the best example here to kind of bring it forward. And all I've got is the word up on the screen, but the EV example is the one that I like the most because this is one Escalent has built over the last 3 years and it resonates with me. So a couple of years ago, we set out to help try and determine who's going to buy the next generation of electric vehicle? And we built a solution called EV Forward. The folks who are buying Teslas now and bought Teslas in the last year or two are not the same people who are going to buy the next electric vehicle coming up, right? They tend to be more affluent. They may have multiple vehicles in the household. They're trying things for the first time. They've got some extra space or extra cars. It's okay if things don't work and they can work their way through it. But we want EVs to become mainstream. Eventually, you're talking to an audience who may have only one vehicle. They may rely on it and they have to figure out how it's going to fit into their life. Now, when I say asking direct questions, I don't mean to this extreme. But in the EV Forward model, we asked 400 different things. We went through 400 different data points to determine if someone would adopt an EV, because I couldn't ask them outright, are you going to buy an EV or not? You don't necessarily need 400, but let me give you a couple of examples. If you don't know what an EV is, and I said, do you have a situation at home where you have a garage with a plug in it or a place to plug in a vehicle, as opposed to you might have a car that parks on the curb out front of your apartment? That's a check mark in your favor. You might be more likely to adopt, or you have the ability to charge a vehicle at work or someplace along the way you recognize charging stations. That's an example of an infrastructure or the ability of their situation that would make them more likely to adopt. But then you also have to consider what their behaviors are. One of my favorite ones is, do you consistently charge in your phone at night when you get home? If you can't remember to charge in your phone, you're going to wake up one day and your car's going to be dead because you ran out of battery after 3 or 4 days of not plugging it in based on today's technology. So by the time I ask about what's around you, how far you drive to work, how far you commute, because many people have a hang up on there's a certain amount of miles I have to get, and the mileage estimates in our research are always way more than the average consumer needs. They think they need 300 or 400 miles, but in reality, they drive 7 or 8 miles to work, 7 or 8 miles back, charge it back in, and it doesn't matter. In fact, in many of the research we've done on powertrains, those hybrid cars that are gas and electric, some of them never get to the point of running out of the gas. And then we've got another engineering challenge that the gas gets stale because they don't go far enough, they're always on electric. Consumers may think they need something, but if you look at their behavior and their lifestyle and ask enough questions, you start to zoom in on a person and say, beyond just being an early adopter or good at tech, person could charge it, they'll remember to plug it in, they like to have new things, they've got other aspects of their life that make it work. So without asking the question directly, I asked a number of questions and I got at the answer I was looking for. Our EV Forward algorithm took some time to get there. This is another challenge, can be time, right? You want to be able to field a survey, and nowadays the answer's got to be 4 to 6 weeks or less. We need answers overnight. It took time for us to validate that model, but eventually we got to a point where we realized through the data that the folks we identified through our 400 data points were statistically 15 times more likely to buy or to shop than those who we said were not. It worked, but it took a while to get there. Second idea I have for you today is to educate and retain. So there's a lot of methods out there to hang on to respondents and continue to talk to them on a regular basis. Many of us reach out to the panels. We have panel access to the Dynadas of the world, right? And we go out and we use those folks to participate in our surveys. Or there's long-term, like sticking them inside of an online research community. We have communities where you can hold on to respondents for a period of time and ask them surveys over the period of a year or years, and you can learn about them. But we don't always look back at what we've learned about them. Sometimes we do longitudinally because we want to see if things have changed over time, but are we looking at what we've really learned about them and how it applies across all the different topics and things that we're asking? The panel sources who will provide respondents many times will have demographics on hand, and we want to ask demographics our own way. We've got our own certain way of doing things. But if you think about it, there's data that everybody holding. Chances are, if you're a large enough organization, you're talking to some of those people 2 or 3 or 4 times and look back at what you talked to them about before, and you realize that some patterns start to emerge about who they are. They give you an idea into whether that person is somebody you could talk to on an ongoing basis and might be more likely to be able to tell you more about these futuristic, forward-looking things, because you're educating them, right? They've seen a few of your surveys and they get an idea of the things you're asking them about and the solutions you've got coming together. We talk about it many times in terms of us learning about them, but in reality, it goes both ways. The more times you talk to a respondent, they're learning about you, and what they're learning about you and the things you're asking helps them to become a better respondent. And in the long run, it'll help you identify those people that can provide you with more rich results as well. One of the beauties of hanging on to people and remembering what they're telling you and having them learn along with you is that you start to identify who those not necessarily experts are, but maybe those enthusiasts, those people who can pick up on your ideas quicker. Some folks will answer your questions, and we stick in verbatim comments to see how articulate somebody is and how well they can express their thoughts. But be paying attention for those people who can articulate themselves better, or have more forward-looking ideas, or mention things that you may not have heard of before, and flag them and remember them for next time. If you're using them in a panel, remember that ID. If you're using them in a community, hang on to them and use them for qualitative, use them more often. It takes time to build up these groups over time, but when you come across somebody who can actually keep up with you, can give you some of those new ideas and maybe even bring some to you that you didn't necessarily think of, they're highly valuable. So the example I wanted to share with you was a community that we've got, we call My Driving Power. Again, a long runway. We started a community of electric vehicle owners several years ago. And this is not a market representative, X number of Tesla owners, Leaf owners, Bolt owners. We didn't build it to be a representative audience. But there's about 800 people in this community. They are enthusiasts. Like I've got guys who strapped batteries in the back of their 99 Ranger and built their own electric vehicle before they could buy it. But those people are well connected to what's going on in the market. Yeah, they don't look like the average consumer necessarily who's just learning and just coming up. But they're well connected to each other and what's going on in the industry, and they're well read. In the very dawn of EV 2 or 3 years ago, we were out talking to consumers. We were hearing many of those that were adopting for the first time saying, I'm adopting because my neighbors got one and they saw that it worked. My brother-in-law had one and he gave me a spreadsheet and I ran the numbers. These folks in this community were the early runners influencing the others. And many of these new technologies now are can grow in the mainstream because they start small and the adoption spreads outward. If you can find a group of people who are very deep on the topic and hang on to them, talk to others. They can give you a feel on not just what's in their head, but what others are thinking as well, and give you a pulse on where the future is going. So hang on to those enthusiasts who you're learning from them and they're learning about you. And the last one's my favorite one. This one's the fun one. And this is about building a future. Create what the world will look like 10 or 20 years from now and use it, right? Designing the future state where these new products and services exist isn't going to be perfect. You don't have a crystal ball. I don't have a crystal ball. There's a lot of benefits to going through an exercise and challenging yourself with what you think the world will look like in the future. First of all, when you build a future and you need to frame it up, the folks you work with, your colleagues, your clients may disagree, but at least you got a point to debate from on what you think the world's going to look like, right? And what you can do with this world is you can put this design in the future you've got in front of your respondents or your customers, and you can see how they react to it in general, to all of these ideas. Now, your specific features or functions or products you want to test may not necessarily be in here, although in some cases we sneak those in too. Put a description of what the world looks like and sneak one of those things in and see how it resonates with people. But if you can put a future world in front of them and then say, here is this world and what it looks like. Have I scared you? And you're thinking, holy crap, that scares me to death. I want no part of that. That's one type of respondent you want to remember. Or if they go, that's cool, that excites me, and I want to be a part of that world, that tells you something about that person you might want to hang on to. And the people begin to separate themselves about how they'll look towards the future. It's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable when you create this as well, creating a future world and making all of these assumptions, educated assumptions based on what you know. For all of us here are market researchers, we work in market research, you've got data or information available to you, and you'd be surprised if you start putting the pieces together, how much of a frame you can come up with. If you build a world and you go, man, I think that's it in 10 years, maybe it's too easy or too definitive. You need to be a little bit more uncomfortable and feel a little more uncertainty in that world that you've created. What I'd like to give you, I'll give you a couple of examples here that I think are fun. What we did in order to come up with a future world, and we do this exercise every year at Escalent. We get together for what we call future, whatever we are at 3.0, 4.0. We put some of our best minds in the room, and we bring in some minds in the room from outside of us to get some outside thinking. And we go through a design thinking approach, which design thinking is very well known. There's books on it. You can get a lot of different opinions on different processes. We call ours design thinking lab, and we've got our own sweet spin on it, but they don't have to look hard to find design thinking ideas out there. The idea that you're going to take some of your best thinking you already have, we call it drawer pulls in some cases, all the research that you're already sitting on, bring it all together as best you can. Organize it. Look at how it relates to each other, right? Put it in the context of what else is going on in the world. So when I'm talking automotive, I'm not just looking at what I know about asking people about electric vehicles or connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles. I'm looking at what the economic conditions are today and where I think those are going to go in 10 or 15 or 20 years. Political environment, the geographic environment, environmental and social. When I go out and look outside of my world and I see the trends that others tell me are going on and what they think things are going to look like in 10 or 20 years, not necessarily good or bad, but different. Everybody wants to debate good or bad. Economics is going to be better, economics is going to be worse. It's hard to tell, but at least you can tell how it might be different, how exchange or transactions might look different. That's going to impact those products that you're creating. And it gives you a perspective on the products and services you're trying to help your clients define. So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples here as I kind of wrap this up. When we did our future looking exercise this year, we were in automotive looking 10 to 20 years into the future. And we said, when we wake up in 10 years, what's automotive going to look like? What are the impacts going to be on automotive? And we came up with dozens of themes around which we build our future world, which if you end up with one of the futuristic surveys from Escalent, you'll see right up, there'll be elements of that in there. We're going to go, does this scare you or does this get you excited? Or any one of a number of questions to get how you react. But here are 3 of the pillars from that exercise that we did. We're looking into the future. And I got excited about these because they go beyond just another feature on an app, right? Or another way to put something inside your vehicle. The first one is called Know Your Worth. I think I'm just skipping one. There we go. Know your worth, or as I refer to this one, data as a currency. You're generating data all the time, and you know everybody's got access to it. Google knows everything there is to know about you. Apple knows everything there is to know about you. And my car manufacturer colleagues are trying to figure out what they can own and what they get their hands on. And at some point soon, it's going to shake out who owns the data. Person who creates it, because right now you create it. Visa gets a part of it as a transaction. Amazon gets part of it as a transaction. Person who bought gets part of it. In 10 years, 15 years, I think this, in our world, we believe this sorts itself out. In 10 years, you own your data. You'll know what it's worth. You'll know what gets created by the vehicle or by your phone or any other device, and you could use it to barter, perhaps, right? I'll buy that car, which by this point, maybe new cars will cost 60 or 70 or 80 grand, but I want $100 off the payment. I'll let you have access to the data. If not, the data's mine. You don't get access to it all. Now I got a manufacturer that has to decide, all right, is the data that comes off that vehicle more valuable to me to learn from it myself and then try and sell you an insurance policy and get in the insurance business? Or is it more valuable to let the consumer own it and go hunt for the insurance themselves and I let them have the monetary value? Who gets the monetary value of that data? But you'll know enough about it. There are companies forming right now that are data brokers. They help you manage all of your online data paths and patterns and what you're creating. But at some point in 10 years, the decision will be upon you. What have you got? How much do you know about it? Or do you buy somebody like your investment broker to learn all about it for you, tell you what you've got, and then help you figure out how to monetize it? Second one is power to the people, or I keep calling this one energy exchanges. So with electric vehicles coming on now, there's going to be electrification, electricity generated from the grid, from your vehicle, from your house. Everything's going to charge everything, right? Think of the way you look at your cell phone today. You know how many bars you've got on your cell phone, whether or not you got a good signal or not, because you look at it, you know, break up, crap, I don't have a signal, walk over here, now I got a better signal. You're going to look at your power usage like that in a decade. You're going to know how much electricity you need, how much electricity you generate. Your F-150 Lightning is going to be generating power. You're going to know how to exchange it. So it's not just about charging your car at your house or charging your car at your work. It's about being out in the parking lot, the person next to you's car needs a charge, so they take power from your vehicle to charge theirs. How much more can you, they charge, there's the word charging, why are they willing to pay for it to have a charge where there's no charging station? Now electricity becomes something that we can exchange amongst us, and it becomes a bartering mechanism. Manufacturers have got to figure out what that means. The financial transactions, people dealing in financial transactions, the energy companies have to figure out what that means. And I believe in 10 years, those of us as consumers will as well. And the third one, which was really fun, we called universally designed, or I call this your digital experience. I may know you because I know we go to dinner, we're friends, we're relatives, we work together. I see you eat, I see you work, right? We go to the movies. There's another whole you out there right now you've all created already. You've all created beyond your physical experience. You've created a digital you. If I never met you, but I go see what you watch on Netflix and what you charge on Visa and what you buy on Amazon, and I go see you've got a recurring charge going on for the YMCA. Okay, you're healthier than I am, so you must work out. And the data that tells me how you drive your vehicle and the geography data that tells me how you move, I might be able to completely recreate you just from the digital trail that you leave. And in 10 years, in the future that Escalent has built to help us frame our future products, that physical and that digital will be inseparable. In fact, they'll be the same. You will have a digital existence. And think about how that benefits you. If you're a car manufacturer, right now you hop into your BMW and you adjust the seat and there's all kinds of settings and you listen to certain radio and you stream certain podcasts and the mirrors are adjusted. And you would expect the vehicle to adjust to you. But when I hop out of that BMW and I hop into a second one, wouldn't you think that car should do the same thing? It's the same manufacturer, right? Why does the car have to learn me all over again? Why is it when I hop in a rental car that's a Mercedes, it has to be any different? Why can't that carry with me? Can't my digital experience, everything about me digitally, pick up and move wherever I go? Why do I have to keep repeating things to new companies and reteach them about me, especially if they say, well, they're sharing data? My digital experience is something that should be known about me and quickly recognized by the companies that are providing these services. What is the monetary value of that? What does that make the world look like? Now, these three ideas that I've brought to you are three of about a dozen that we came up with when we built this future world, which there's like flying things on this picture. And we didn't predict anything's going to be flying in 10 years. This was just an image for the presentation. But now picture trying to survey a respondent or talk to a respondent. And I'm not just saying, here's a standalone concept. What do you think? If I've got someone who's worked with me before, they might understand a little bit better because I've educated them along the way, right? If I can ask about their behavior and kind of back into some of the questions that already relate to how they exist, that might help. But now imagine a third layer where I can provide a future and say, now I can tell you what this new product will look like in this context. Imagine a world that's got this, 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 and this, and it helps frame the response instead of being stuck on, I can't picture how I'm going to use that. I can't even imagine. Well, imagine all this is going on around you. Does that help you? Yeah, maybe it does. So in conclusion for the presentation today, these are not all the answers to this. So we're at the very beginning of figuring out how we're going to talk to people about what the future is going to look like and how we get answers. But the challenge is in front of us because the monetary targets have already been set out there. Billions of dollars is going to be generated. Everybody's trying to figure out who's going to buy, what they're going to buy. We don't know if we start with the what or who, and we don't know what they know and how to define it. So how do we build what's going to be successful in the future when the future is so uncertain? By hopefully coming up with some indirect questions to leverage what we can learn about them today, building up them through learning with them together, and then giving them a future context with which they can react. That's the presentation for today. Thank you, everybody in the room and the few of you online.
Virtual.
Do you take questions or how do you?
No questions have come in, but if anyone is online and has a question, please submit it. We can answer any questions anyone has here.
Throw a question
Of
out.
course, Dave's gonna.
Okay. So, okay, you want EV intenders, so you build a panel of EV folks, right? Based on your 400 question battery rate. What about those who are ICE or EV resistant? Do you have a similar panel of people who fall out of those 400 questions?
Yes,
Are you looking at those people to see what are the barriers, if you will?
absolutely. I hate to use the S word, segmentation, because researchers tend to think, okay, you build a segmentation, that's what it is. You put everybody into buckets. But what we actually started with was after we got through all of these points, we realized there were 6 distinct type of buyers. And we did 2 things. We segmented them, and then we applied a propensity score to them on a scale of 0 to 100. And those aligned naturally to figure out how close they were to adopting it. To your point, Dave, there were people at that bottom end, and I can't remember the name of the segment, and if Casey's listening, they'll shoot me. There's names of them at the lower end, and these are the folks that are, you're gonna pry my diesel heavy out of my cold dead hands. But there's still glimmers of hope. Those people still aren't at 0. And at some point, as the world keeps moving, they've got to come along. So what we're watching is, and the last 2 or 3 years have been very telling, those folks who were dead set against it before, they've moved a little. The marketing and the advertising and the education that's going on right now is moving everybody a little in the right direction, but we have a baseline from 3 years ago to see now how they're moving. And they're not necessarily a panel of fixed people. There were 10,000 folks, I believe, in the first swing, and we added another 10,000 in the second year. So there's over 20,000 people involved here, and many of them are rotated out. It's not the same people for research purposes. So it's really about the tool, not necessarily just those individuals, to make sure that the industry, the consumers as a whole, which way they're moving. And generally speaking, most of them are, some moving faster than others, are moving in that direction.
So, I mean, do you have a community of ICE loyalists?
I don't have a community of them, but I can identify who those people are. One of the things we did is we took that 400 point thing is overwhelming. We have boiled it down to an algorithm that I believe is 15 questions or less, and now the statistician will shoot me if it's a little more than that. But there's actually a way to build an algorithm that is relatively predictive. It's like 70 or 75% predictive. So in a handful of questions, you can get there. But so a key point to this is it was a lot of indirect questioning and working your way around at the beginning. Once you figured out what those key points were that really identify those people, we boiled it down quickly. And now if you looked at me and said, I want to know who's more or less likely to adopt EV, I can get there in a handful of questions, where before it took me many more. It was a journey to eventually tease out. And part of that journey was learning which questions work. And part of that journey was the validation of seeing over the last 2 years who's actually bought, actually shopped, got close to buying, so that we can make sure that we have it correct.
We have a question on Zoom from Brian that asks, are you using social as well as to keep a pulse on EV sentiment and conversations?
Yes, we are. Now, we don't put a whole lot on social because I struggle with social, right? There's a lot shared out there about maybe a product or a brand, but nobody puts pictures of their ugly kids out on social. So you got to take social with a grain of salt. But from a secondary research perspective, there's a lot going on out there that we watch on what every manufacturer, every supplier, every company that's involved that even is not automotive is creating or saying or doing. And in some cases, how people out there in the general sphere are reacting to that. So more than just social on its own, secondary research, watching about what's coming up in the press and what's being built, and then watching a little bit of the reaction to that does guide this in electrification, connectivity, autonomy, even in shared mobility. It doesn't stand up on its own, but in connection with primary research, it's still valuable. It's a valuable tool.
We have another question online from Janelle. I believe that's how you say your name. It says, great insights. As a professor, I'm worried about making sure students are learning what they need to be successful in their careers. What are the tools you are seeing as being most important for students to know coming out of school these days?
Oh my gosh. Be curious. It's in market research, there's a lot of the skills that work, the techniques that we can teach people, how to do quantitative, how to do qualitative. Those students are coming out of school right now with a sense of curiosity that look beyond a number and see what the story is behind a number are the ones that are coming into our organization and are the most valuable to us. Absolutely. It's not about seeing a number, it's asking why it is the way it is and how it relates to everything else going on around. A lot of what I shared today is context in a bigger picture. Nothing exists in a vacuum itself. And when it's hard to define that one thing, you've got to look at what's going on around it. Don't lose sight of, I've got an answer. But as I talked about political, the social, the environmental, and so on is impacting that. And in order to fulfill my clients' needs, the questions they're asking, they never come anymore with just one study. If you get these answers, we should be good. They're coming for, here's what I need, but can you tell me how many other resources you have available that might inform this, or might look similar to it, or you might have heard something else, or that conflicts with what I'm saying? Bring it all together. Be curious, look for more, widen the net. That's where, those are the folks we're looking for. Those that have come in have done fabulously. I think I danced around it kind of generic, but I hope I answered it.
We have another question and comment
Okay.
from Jeff. Says, I don't believe auto purchasers are very predictive of other purchasers who are much better at early adoption due to the lack of risk. Of the 400 questions you ask, do you ask about the path to purchase and how it has evolved and will evolve?
Oh my gosh. Yes, there are path to purchase aspects, but nowadays we all agree in automotive, a path to purchase just looks like a huge squiggly line. It's hard to tell, right? And the last 2 years have upended all of us. We thought digital was the thing and COVID was going to push everybody online. And now all of a sudden we see the Carvanas and some of the used vehicle companies are struggling because of inventory and supply chain. So there are a lot of folks out there that still try to start with a linear path of purchase in automotive, right? Awareness, consideration, intention, right, opinion, and they try to follow that path. And everybody in automotive knows that that's pretty much been blown out of the water. And there's a lot of different paths and different people react to those paths differently. So it is difficult to predict the path somebody's going to take, but we seem to be doing a good job of predicting where we think they're going to end up when they get to the finish line. Now, let me clarify that as well, because it's not without challenges. Much of the way we structured automotive for years, and the manufacturers structured themselves were around segments, right? There's the truck folks, there's the van folks, there's the commercial folks, there's the car folks, and they built their organization around it. Their product planners, their managers, their research was even aligned around this. And now people are coming into the marketplace and I'm saying, what are you cross-shopping? Well, I was looking at getting a pickup truck, but I saw this Mustang Mach-E over here, and this thing is pretty flippin'. You just cross-shop this electric hybrid SUV crossover looking thing with a full-size pickup truck. Segment busting is immense in automotive right now, and we're all trying to figure out what that means. That's one of the greatest disruptors of the path to purchase. Isn't so much the information they gather and maybe what they need to fit their needs, the product they need, and then still using the dealership. The dealership is still a very important part of what's going on to get informed, get information. Butts in the seats, as my colleague Dana says, the ability to actually test a product. But what's changed about that is they're considering all of these different segment busting vehicles. And that's what's made it so much harder to predict where somebody's going to go. In our instance, what we're doing very simply is predicting not necessarily segment, but their internal combustion and will they go to electric? And we have statistically proven we can tell who is coming up next. And in the last couple of years, those people are actually buying or shopping because it's just a jump from powertrain to powertrain. But to answer that question, there's a whole lot more to the path to purchase than just which powertrain they're flipping. And a lot of it's a plate of spaghetti. I get it.
Any other questions? Any other online?
There's no others online
Okay.
right now?
Okay.
All right. Thanks,
Jason,
Dave. Thanks everybody
thank you
for having
so
me. I
much.
appreciate it.
Tremendous presentation. Thanks a lot. Thank you again, Kate.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you everyone for joining on online.